Good afternoon. I am delighted to welcome you to the NSF grant information panel. This is our, I think, third year or something of organizing this session, and we found it to be bring great value to a subset of the BMES community. So I hope you'll be eager to ask questions and participate, and I want to make sure everybody sees that you have paper next to you on the seat so you can write down even your stupidest questions, and we'll pass them forward and get the answers that you need. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce to you Michelle Grimm. Michelle Grimm is currently the program director for CBET at the NSF, but she has a long career of contributions to research and to education. So Michelle got her bachelor's in 1994 at Hopkins and her PhD at Penn, in 1994. Somehow I don't know how that missed that little bit. And she joined Wayne State as an assistant professor and developed an active research program in the area of biomechanics and plexus palsy, and then progressed through the ranks over the years to become Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in 2010, where she established their undergraduate biomedical engineering program. She has also contributed to the development of a very interesting transfer program to get a degree from community colleges into Wayne State, working in the office of the provost. Michelle has been a commissioner for ABET and a program evaluator for over close to a decade, and so we at BMES have been working closely with her for that entire period of time, but more recently since she joined the NSF in 2016 and has been a great supporter of this program. What we have for you today is a set of panelists who are going to speak and answer questions after Michelle gives an introduction to the programs that are available for junior investigators at the NSF. So we have a representation of all the different awards and the reviewers as well. So we have Spence Lake from Washington University, who is going to represent the being a successful awardee for the unsolicited proposals. Veronica Santos, who is from UCLA, and she represents a successful awardee for both career and unsolicited awards, and also she will has experience as a reviewer. Wil Joyner at George Mason University is a recent career awardee. Delphine Dean has, I think, received an unsolicited and reviewed both programs. And Kaiming Yang has also, he is the chair of biomedical engineering at Binghamton University, and he also has tremendous experience with reviewing for the career and unsolicited awards. So let's hear a presentation from Dr. Grimm, and then we'll get your questions answered.
Anyway, thanks very much for joining us, and based on pre-registrations, hopefully we will have more people wandering in, but we want to leave enough time for questions at the end, so wanted to really get this kicked off. So what I'm going to do to start things off is really kind of step through what I would recommend as a process for putting your best proposal forward to the NSF and increasing your chance of success. And really, we all know that grant funding is extraordinarily competitive nowadays. You need to put time and effort into it in order to be successful. Even the best grant writers are going to get those declines. But what can you do as an investigator to really present the best proposal to the panel that you possibly can? So the first thing is to identify the right program. And that's not as easy as it might sound. I often start this off, and I'm going to do it here. How many in this room have heard that NSF does not support anything related to human medicine? Okay. Absolutely false. So we do have many programs that do support biomedical engineering related work, and therefore if it is biomedical engineering, it obviously must be related to human health, right? So anyway, in order to figure out where the right program is, first you need to understand the basic organization of the NSF. We are an independent agency. We do not report to a cabinet secretary. There are a number of directorates within the NSF. And the two that primarily will support work related to biomedical engineering are of course engineering, and there are a lot of programs within engineering, and then also computer and information science and engineering, the SIZE program, has several programs that will also support biomedical engineering related work. If we look at engineering specifically, we are broken down into 5 principal divisions. They are generally grouped based on discipline, and each one of those is headed by a division director, and then we have numerous programs underneath that. There is also the Division of Industrial Innovation and Partnerships, which handles the SBIR, STTR awards, and Engineering Education and Centers, which is not discipline specific. So this is CBET. This is the division that I reside within, and I'm happy to say today that we are joined by our new division director, Rich Dickinson, who will come up during the panel discussion, and one of the other program directors, Chengjong Lee, is somewhere. Oh, he's also doing the panel next door, so he's probably doing that. He's trying to split his time. International programs. And so we are, my program is within a cluster called Engineering, Biology, and Health. And so within that cluster are numerous programs that are really targeted at biomedical engineering. But they are not the only programs that have that link to biomedical engineering. And one of the things I would encourage you today, I didn't want to spend the time to step through all of the different programs. But at the NSF booth, there is a one-pager that lists all of the core programs that support biomedical engineering-related research. I encourage you to stop by, pick that up, and that's a great starting point to decide which program you think is the best fit for your particular research. As biomedical engineers, we have an option. Do you apply to NSF? Do you apply to NIH? Do you apply to numerous other federal agencies? What is the difference between those? And there is a lot of overlap. Basic differences. NSF supports advancement of foundational knowledge. There needs to be something that you can point to that is real innovation in the engineering or science, depending on what program you are submitting to. Of course, as engineers, there will always be some degree of application or translation, right? That's what we do as engineers. But you still need to be able to point to that advancement and novelty and innovation in the engineering in order to be successful at NSF. We do support limited feasibility studies with human volunteers if it is appropriate to the scope of the work. We do not support full clinical studies. We do support, some programs support in vivo work in animals, if you can fit it into the budget limitations that NSF requires. So those sorts of studies are appropriate for NSF if you're asking those foundational, fundamental questions. Here's the kicker. The budget is typically limited to about $100,000 a year, including indirect costs, whether it's an unsolicited award or a career award if you're applying through engineering. SIZE programs, luckily for them, have slightly larger budgets, but talk to the program director, and the budgets within NSF are going to be less than what you might be able to obtain through the NIH. NIH specifically supports translational research with direct medical application. They are generally disease-specific, and they are looking at nearer-term application to solve medical challenges. The nice thing, they have much larger budgets. There is work, you may be able to submit the same project as an R21 to NIH and an NSF grant because of what an R21 expects. Okay, so R21s are looking at that more foundational early level work. Please do not cut and paste your NSF grant into your NIH or vice versa. It is extraordinarily obvious. So even if the overall objectives are the same, please take the time to rewrite it to fit what the agency is looking for in terms of a proposal. Okay, so you figured out the program you want to submit to. Now you need to actually pick what mechanism you're going to submit through. And we have different things that we classify. Standard grants. These include career awards, unsolicited, which is the very odd NSF name, which just means there wasn't a specific call for proposals, conferences and workshops. If you want to submit with an industry partner, it may be appropriate for GOLI, but those dates are exactly the same as the unsolicited window. And Iger, the Iger mechanism, which I'll talk about a little more in detail. We do accept proposals for supplements. Both the most common ones are for research experiences for undergraduates or research experiences for teachers, and those can come in at any time. I encourage you to talk to the program director ahead of time to find out what the budgetary limitations are and what that program director would like to see in that. And then there are various special programs that are announced at various times. So keep an eye on the NSF website, Dear Colleague letters, talk with your research office, and that'll help you stay abreast of some of these opportunities. Okay, I want to call out some of the special goals that apply to career awards. So these are for young investigators, tenure track, untenured, or equivalent, and it's an agency-wide program to really provide a sustained level of support so that a young faculty member can get their career going, both in terms of research and in terms of education. The awardees must have both a creative and innovative research program outlined, but also an integrated research and education program. So you really need to think about both sides of that. And there's a goal to increase the participation of investigators from traditionally underrepresented groups, which also carries over to the outreach activities in which we strongly encourage activities that include underrepresented students or K-12 or public groups that are not necessarily traditionally represented within STEM fields. The general guidelines for engineering is that it's a 5-year award, a minimum of $500,000. My recommendation is the maximum is about $500,000. We do allow some wiggle room, but as I talk to PIs and they say, but can't I have more money? If I funded one proposal at, say, $750,000, so it's 1.5 times the standard budget, that's half another award I can't make. And so we really do try to provide enough funding that you can do the work you need to do, but we have to keep in mind that we have very limited budgets and we do want to support as much solid research as we possibly can. The submission window for careers is in July, and that is common for all programs within the agency. To submit a career, you must hold a doctoral degree. You must be employed in a tenure track or equivalent sort of position, although there is now an option for non-tenure track faculty who have research as a substantive portion of their assignment. That can often be individuals who are in a teaching line, but they're expected to do education-based research, and so one of our directorates focuses on education, and so that opens up the opportunity for these faculty to submit career awards. You have to be employed as an assistant professor or equivalent as of October 1, so you need to pay attention to that timing as you think about your scheduling your submissions, and you get 3 chances. So as you look at your timing, you become an assistant professor, figure out when it makes sense for you to submit each of these 3 opportunities for your career proposal in case you need to use all 3 of them. And you only can receive 1 career award, so you cannot receive more than 1. Once you've received that, then there's no more pressure to submit another career application. Please, please, please do not feel pressured that you need to submit this application the first year that you are in a tenure track position, because you may not have done enough work to really build up the preliminary data to separate yourself out from your mentors. You have typically 6 to 7 years on your tenure clock. So figure out when it makes sense during that tenure period to submit these 3 opportunities. Don't use up one just for the sake of getting feedback. And I've heard that. PIs will say, well, I was told to submit one my first year so that I can get feedback on what I'm thinking about, but you've just wasted one of those opportunities then. For the unsolicited program, this is the standard mechanism of funding. This applies to all individuals irrespective of levels. Whether you can submit as a PI for an unsolicited depends purely on what your institution says. Some institutions allow postdocs to submit as PIs, some don't. So talk to your, if you're a postdoc, talk to your mentor, talk to your sponsored research office. General guidelines for engineering, 3-year projects. The funding does vary, but for CBET, it's typically $300,000 over 3 years. We give a little bit of wiggle room if you are doing a truly multidisciplinary project at the same institution, and a little more latitude if it's submitted through what's called the collaborative mechanism. So it's 2 proposals or more that come in from multiple institutions. So they're reaching out again to the program director, find out what those budget guidelines are. For CBET, the submission deadline is between October 1st and October 20th every year, so I've been having a lot of questions over the last few weeks from PIs getting their proposals ready. Some divisions have 2 submission windows. We have a few programs within CBET that have just gone to no deadline, and so you can submit at any time, and then they pull the panels together based on the proposals that come in during the year. I do not foresee DARE or EBMS going to no deadline just because the programs are so diverse that trying to actually pull panels together at various times during the year would become a nightmare. So expect those to remain with set deadlines. Iger is a great program, but it is not for obtaining preliminary data. I get a lot of emails from young faculty saying, can I apply for an Iger award to get preliminary data for my idea? That's not what this mechanism is for. It really is for high risk, likely high reward proposals that would not be appropriate for a standard panel review. You have to contact the program director ahead of time. I didn't have this plan when I first started out as program director, but my policy now is I will not award an Iger unless a project idea has been through panel review, so that I can get feedback from the experts in the field, because I don't have enough money to do so, okay? So I want to get that feedback, and then if something comes out and the panel says, you know what, we really think this is a super cool idea, this could have a huge return, but it's just too risky, then I'll reach out to the PI and say, why don't we pull something together that would be appropriate for an Iger award to get that preliminary result and prove your concept. So that's just my policy. Other program directors may have different policies, but you have to reach out to that program director ahead of time. If you work at a primarily undergraduate institution, think about tagging your proposal with the RUI tag. This is for institutions that do not offer significant graduate programs, especially at the doctoral level. They are submitted through the same unsolicited mechanism, but it gives us a heads up as the program director because we are looking to provide diversity of funding to various institutions. It also is a heads up to the panelists that if you indicate that you are supporting master's students on this proposal, and they say, well, why are they supporting master's students and not PhD students? Well, the RUI clues you into the fact that maybe it's because they don't have a PhD program. And so it provides that full set of information as we go through the review process. All right, so you decided on your program, you decided on what mechanism. Now you want to reach out and talk to the program officer. And it's very good to check and make sure that your planned project actually fits the scope of the program. And keep in mind, a lot of program officers change every 2 to 4 years because many of us are rotators. Don't assume that just because your project fit under a previous program director that it will still fit. So I always encourage you to reach out. Start with an email. Some program directors will take cold calls. I don't, just because my day is structured such that I don't generally have time in the middle of doing something else to pick up the phone and have more than a 30-second conversation with somebody. So start with an email. You can schedule a time for a call. You can schedule a time for a visit. Think about sending at most 1-page summary of your research, and make it really easy for the program director. Include there very clearly what the objectives of your proposal are so that they don't have to dig for those anywhere. And they can then provide you feedback on whether there's a fit with the program or not. Please don't wait until the last minute. I have in the past literally received emails a day or two before a deadline saying, does this project fit your program? And if I tell you no, you don't have much time to go out and find another program, or you don't have time to revise your project to fit. So please do that early. Program directors do have significant influences on funding decisions. It's great for them to understand your full research plan. I don't think any of us move proposals up from significantly within the panel rankings just because we like somebody, but if we can fully understand the scope of your research, that helps us in figuring out where everything fits together. It helps us write a good review analysis. So it's a great opportunity to talk to program directors and really get to know them. There can also be some good general guidance on proposal writing. I don't ever tease apart a full proposal. I have been asked in the past to read a full proposal and provide feedback. That will not happen, but just general grantsmanship things will be a point that we can discuss during any conversation. Okay, so now you're writing your proposal. You've talked to your program director. Please, 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 please make sure you review the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So this is the PAPPG. In the government, we like to have acronyms for everything. And this provides all of the relevant rules and regulations in terms of what has to be included in an NSF proposal, formatting guidelines, everything that's important. So read it before you start to write, and then reread it before you submit your proposal to make sure you have not forgotten something. If various parts of this are not met, if the margins are wrong, if the line spacing is wrong, if the font size is wrong, if you don't include intellectual merit and broader impacts in your project summary sheet, it will be returned without review, okay? So just make sure all those guidelines are followed. Very important, letters of commitment are now allowed to be 1 sentence long. So this is everything but the chair's letter for a career award. All you can say is, that letter can say, I will do what is said and described in the proposal. Because people were using those letters to bypass the 15-page limit on their proposals. So we can return those without review if you exceed that. Everything that your collaborator should be doing, is going to do for you, should be described within the body of the proposal. The review criteria for NSF for all proposals, there are 2, intellectual merit and broader impact. Intellectual merit covers whether the work is going to advance the field, contribute to the knowledge both within the field and outside. Is it creative? Is it novel? Is it well conceived and organized? So if it's not well written, this is where you're going to be dinged by the panelists in intellectual merit. Is the team or the PI qualified to conduct the research, and do they have adequate facilities? Broader impact is equally important to NSF. So NSF wants to support research that has a broader societal impact. And this can include activities that broaden participation in STEM, that improve STEM education, that increase public scientific literacy. These activities do not need themselves to be innovative, but it's always beneficial if they are. It's very important, though, that they be value added to something, that you're not just continuing to do what you've done for 12 years, or say that, well, I'm going to go give a lecture, 1 lecture a year in the summer camp, and please don't just rely on what we do as faculty every day. So don't say, I'm going to supervise grad students and I'm going to teach a class related to my research, and have that be your broader impact. I would also caution anybody who's submitting a biomedical engineering related proposal, do not just rely on the fact that your work is going to eventually impact human health as your broader impact. Because guess what? If it's a BME related proposal, it had better eventually have an impact on human health. Otherwise, why are you doing the work? So you do need to do something beyond that for the panel to believe that you are really meeting a high level in broader impact. So when you are planning your proposal, first, of course, start with your great idea. Think about why it's important. Make sure you frame the work you're doing based on what's been done before, and I encourage everybody to look back at old literature as well as newer literature, because yes, there was good science done before 1985. So don't forget that, because I've seen a lot of proposals dinged because people have not gone back and realized that work has been done in the past. And you young investigators have it easy now with as much indexing and digital journals as there actually are. So really think about how you can position that work. How are you going to do the work? What expertise or facilities do you need to be successful? Do you have those? Do you need to reach out to a collaborator to find those? And what is a reasonable project based on the time and budget limitations? It's bad to be overambitious, and it's bad to be underambitious. So really plan that out. I encourage everybody to include a timeline and really think about how you're going to do that. For your careers, include your educational components in your timeline, because they should be a major part of what you're doing. So again, think about how you're going to implement that. And then you need enough preliminary data to demonstrate that you are actually going to be able to do the work. Not as much as NIH requires. Yes, the joke that you have to basically have the project done before you get funded at NIH has been around for 25 plus years, so we don't expect that much. But you need to demonstrate to the panel that the work is going to be successful. If there are objectives that build on each other, so some of the objectives maybe you don't have preliminary data for, talk about the potential challenges, come up with mitigation strategies so that you can actually say, yes, this may be a problem, how are you going to get past that? All right, we'll move on to keys to success. Communication is the most important thing. You need to tell a clear story. You need to explain to the panel why you want to do the work, what it's going to do for the field. Please avoid jargon. Many panels are consist of what I call semi-experts. So you've got a broad program. You're going to have individuals that are strong researchers in biomedical engineering, but they may not be experts in your particular subfield. Now, reach out to the program officer and find out what the expectation is on that technical discussion. Some programs, such as biomechanics and mechanobiology, maybe the entire panel are going to be experts in advanced mechanics, and so you can be a little more detailed. If you send something to EBMS with pages and pages of equations, you're going to upset the reviewers and not be likely to get funded. So think about that. You really want to be able to communicate your ideas to the reviewers clearly. If you are developing any sorts of models or designs, please validate those. A model does not do us any good in biomedical engineering if you haven't proven that it is actually representative of the system you are trying to model. Don't forget, you are engineers. And you want to set up metrics for knowing that your work is actually going to be successful. Broader impacts should be well thought out. We've already talked about not relying on human health, and we really encourage you to look at those outreach activities. For career proposals, the educational component is absolutely required, and you must describe that integration. For career proposals, additional keys to success, you want to project a long-term vision. What are you going to do as a researcher, not just within the 5 years of the award, but beyond that? Demonstrate that you're independent. Don't just rely on what you've done with your mentor and your advisor in the past, but you really need to demonstrate that you're going to be able to do this work independently and that it's moving at least in a slightly different direction from where you've worked before. Describe that integrated education and research plan. Really think about how you're going to describe that integration. It doesn't have to be obvious, but you need to tell the story. So if you're working in nanomaterials and you're doing an outreach to kindergartners with Legos, great, talk about how you're talking about structures and all the rest of it. You can describe what that integration is, but make that clear. Have the proposal read by as many people as you possibly can before you submit it. You want it to include experts in the science that you're looking at. You want it to include semi-experts similar to the panel, so other members of your department who may not be experts in your particular field. Strong technical writers are always a help, And if you are submitting a career award, have previous career recipients look at it to really evaluate what your educational component is. Take their recommendations to heart, so do this early enough that you can actually take their feedback and integrate it into your writing. Please make sure there are no spelling errors, grammatical errors, missing figures, missing sections. I had a proposal reviewed last winter where the PI had listed 3 objectives at the beginning and only had 2 in the body of the proposal. He had decided to cut out 1 because of the constraints of time and money, but never went back to the start to remove it. It's a red flag for the panelists. And we don't see that as individuals writing these proposals because we know what we think is there, and then all of a sudden, we've forgotten to make some change. Work closely with your research office on getting this submitted. Please remember that they are human. Occasionally mistakes are made. If you give it to them and they are only able to submit it at 4:55 p.m. and something happens badly, there is no way around that. There will not be an exception made to allow it to be submitted again. So give it to them early. Those last steps are out of your hands. Typically, most research offices want several days in advance. The deadline is real down to the second, 5 o'clock p.m., your local time. At 5 o'clock and 30 seconds, you're locked out. So make sure it gets there early. And if you find, and I've had many emails on this over the last year and a half, if you find that you've submitted something incorrectly, your biosketch got uploaded incorrectly, or another document got uploaded incorrectly, and it's past the deadline, do not go in and change that, because that changes the submission date and time of the entire proposal. So sorry, once it's submitted, that's it. Cross your fingers that it's not going to have a huge negative impact on things. Also then, that's the benefit of doing it early, so you can double check that everything was submitted correctly. Common pitfalls, the use of superlatives without really backing them up or doing it over and over again. So yes, it's okay, it's great to point out to the panelists what you think is novel or transformative, but don't use those words over and over again and when you do use those words, back it up. Explain why you believe that's the case. If you're going to say that something is the first time ever, you darn well better make sure that it actually is the first time ever, because you can bet some of the panelists will know if it's been done before. Make sure there's a clear scientific question, that the project itself is not incremental, that it doesn't look like it's just designed to produce the next paper in your series. Make sure there's enough preliminary data or arguments that support the feasibility. If you have ambiguous or unclear descriptions in your research plan, that's a no-no. So explain why you chose various cell lines, explain why you chose various materials, do a power analysis to justify sample sizes. Doesn't take up a lot of space, but it's important for the panelists to understand those decisions. And as I mentioned, if it's overly ambitious or underly ambitious, that will also cause issues with the panel review. For careers, if you don't integrate that educational and research component in a meaningful way, that is viewed negatively. And you want to make sure that you're assessing any educational or outreach activities. While it is not required by NSF, the panelists will tell you that they are now looking for that. They want to see that you're actually making sure that these activities that you're doing are having an impact. And for your educational activity, as I said, beyond what you would do based on your standard faculty responsibilities. Okay, just very quickly, what are next steps? So you're going to be waiting for a decision. We have to make 75% of our decisions within 6 months, so it is going to take some time. The program officer may reach out with questions for follow-up to give us more information before we make our recommendations. Getting that email with questions does not guarantee you funding. Not receiving it does not mean you are not getting funding. It's just one of those things we might do. Keep working on your other grant proposals while you're waiting. Don't just sit around twiddling your thumbs in this funding environment. We always have to be writing. Don't submit the same proposal to multiple NSF programs. They will be flagged, and that's a no-no. Please don't reach out to us before you get the official decision. So wait until you hear from the NSF. My big excuse is I don't actually make the decision, I just make a recommendation, but we want you to have that feedback from the panel before we talk to you in detail about what they said. And then get ready to submit your next NSF proposal. Start planning early. Read all the reviews carefully. Take them as constructive criticism. There is no cover sheet for NSF saying these are the changes I've made, so each submission is viewed as a completely new proposal. So think about how you can address that. You do need to make changes to your proposal before it's resubmitted, otherwise it can be kicked back. But if you update the preliminary data and the framework of what others have done, that will count as a substantial revision. Talk to the program officer about things, and really you need to be targeting scores of excellent and very good. So if you get goods, sorry, that's actually not very good. So you want to get excellent, possibly very goods, in order to have a chance of getting funded. And considering volunteering to serve as a panelist. You will learn a lot through that process. Feel free to stop by the NSF booth and drop off. I have cards there that you can fill out to volunteer as a panelist. You get to see it from the other side. You cannot serve as a panelist for a cycle where you've submitted, so we will check on that. Take advantage of workshops like this and identify multiple mentors that can help with all aspects of things. And most importantly, persevere. It is very difficult nowadays to get funding, but if you've got a great idea and you keep working on it, hopefully you will find the right agency and be successful. Okay, so now I'm going to call up the first group of panelists and have them come up. Can we have our awardees come up to the table? And as they do so, is there a single question that we will have plenty of time for Q&A later?
All right, hi, I'm Spencer Lake. So I'll start. Each of us have just brief presentations to give a few overview points of what our proposals were and some of our take-home advice, I guess, and then we'll take questions after that, I guess, is the format. So I'm an assistant professor at WashU in St. Louis in mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering and orthopedic surgery. My research program, I run the musculoskeletal soft tissue lab, and we study multiskeletal structure-function relationships of musculoskeletal soft tissues and joints. Here's just a few pretty pictures from my lab group. So we look at tendons and ligaments, some joint conditions like contracture, things like that. So I got an unsolicited NSF award that was through CMMI and BMMB, which is biomechanics and mechanobiology. And the title of my award is Multiscale Mechanisms of Force Transfer in Tendon. So the motivation for this is that tendon injuries are common. This is a clinical problem that we're interested in, but it's also fascinating material from kind of a mechanical perspective. There's a hierarchical structure that I've shown a schematic down here below. And what we're interested in is understanding is how are mechanical signals transferred across these different length scales, and how does that play into fundamental concepts like mechanotransduction, tissue adaptation, and injury and degeneration, things like that. So we were looking to understand how do these structure-function relationships exist in healthy tissues and understanding how these properties would change in injury and disease. So just one more slide on my proposal, just kind of an overview of what we did, what the proposal was about. So the plan was to look at, we're looking at several potential linking components that link across different length scales, and the two we're evaluating here are elastic fibers and collagen crosslinks. And we're looking at mechanical contributions at different length scales using some multi-scale mechanical testing combined with multiphoton imaging. And then we're looking at interactions between these tissue constituents using a network computational model. And I'll touch on later on kind of this idea of combining experimental and computational approaches. And then kind of the broader impacts. I mentioned this first point already, so kind of the impact of the actual research. And then it also incorporated an interactive teaching module as part of a workshop that we do with K-12 outreach. And there's a picture here on the bottom of one of my grad students working with a middle school student. And then also enhance some graduate education on multi-scale mechanics of materials. So they asked us to give us a brief overview of when we got our grants. So I started as an assistant professor in August of 2012, submitted this proposal in September of 2015, and was awarded that following spring. And the benefits of this award for me is it's really funded a fundamental project in my lab that built nicely off of my work I'd done in training, but also really expanded my research into new areas using some genetic mouse models and using some in vivo and ex vivo rat tendon models, and then expanding some computational stuff we've done. And it really enhanced my outreach and education efforts. And of course, it's been great to support not only the research costs, but also it's helped support 2 PhD students, 1 undergrad and a high school student, as well as part of the salary of a research engineer. And then several other students have contributed as well. So I've just grouped, I have 3 slides here that are important lessons that I learned through the process, and some of this will reiterate things that Michelle said, but these are things that I just thought about preparing for this. What were things that I thought were good advice that I got or things that I learned along the way? So important lesson number 1 is, Michelle talked about this, but I think it's really important to understand the difference between NSF and NIH proposals. So really the focus, the perspective, the approach, they're quite different. And so I kind of think of this as, and this may be simplifying a little here, but NSF is more basic science, fundamental science. It can be health related, as Michelle talked about. NIH is more applied or translational. It's usually more focused, or often more focused on a specific clinical issue or disease or condition. And they are obviously much more health focused. The logistics are quite different. I'll just go this quick because Michelle already talked about it. But in terms of duration, budget, overall scope, they're very different. So make sure as you're preparing an NSF grant, you kind of know what the logistics and what the framework is for a proposal. And then a couple other things that I thought were interesting to me as I first started preparing an NSF proposal. Broader impacts are not included explicitly in the NIH proposal, so it's different. You have to have that focus as part of your proposal. There are no real revisions for NSF proposals. Each time you submit a new NSF proposal, it's a different panel, and you don't know who's on the panel, and it can be new each time, which is different from the NIH format. So big differences there. So just as you go into it, be prepared. Have a good understanding of how these mechanisms are different. The second important lesson. Find a good fit and write a strong proposal. So Michelle talked about this as well. You want to make sure you have a good fit to the specific program. So when I submitted mine to BMMB, I had read the call for the proposals or the areas of interest that they like to fund, and it fit very, very well with the project I had in mind. It seemed like a really good fit. I reached out and talked to the program officer and shared a one-page summary and got good feedback and was encouraged to submit. So that was a really helpful for me to find a place that seemed like a good match. Have a good research plan. Obviously, this is very important. You want to try and make a transformative contribution. I mentioned in my proposal, one thing I tried to do was have a combined approach. So I combined both experimental work and computational work and really highlighted kind of that synergy between those 2 types of an approach. And you really want to have strong intellectual merit. But don't forget the broader impacts. It's also important. And you want to propose something you're excited about, innovative if possible, and something that's achievable. You also want to have synergy with the research plan. That's most important for the career proposal, but for any of these proposals, it's important to have some synergy. And then you can tap into existing programs and resources, but it's good if you have a unique contribution or something that's new about what you're proposing. My last slide, write an excellent proposal. So that's obvious, but when I first started my faculty position, I was seeking out advice from my mentors, and my undergraduate research mentor, I sat down with him and asked a bunch of career advice, and I asked him about proposals, and he said something to me. He said, the best way to get a grant funded is to write a good grant. And I thought that was the worst advice because that's obvious, right? But what he meant by that is that even if you have a very, very good idea, if you write it poorly, it's going to be very, very hard to get it funded. And I think that's really true. So in addition to getting an award, I've been on several panels at the NSF, and you can really tell when someone's put a lot of time into it and written a really nice proposal. And sometimes you'll see a proposal that is an exciting project idea, but clearly is not well explained or well put together, and that's difficult to give a positive score for. So write a really good proposal. And what that means is you have to take your time. So on my proposal, I spent a long time, maybe too long, preparing it. But I really dug into the literature significantly so I could place my project in the proper context of what had been done, and really wanted to have a strong motivation for my plan. Get help from other people. So read proposals from friends or mentors that have been successful, and then share your drafts with mentors and colleagues as much as you can and get a lot of feedback and incorporate that feedback. And then it is a great opportunity to serve on an NSF panel. I served on 2 panels before I submitted mine, and that really informed how I wrote my proposal. And lastly, you have to swing that bat. So just like you can't hit a home run without swinging at some pitches, you have to submit a grant. You've got to just send it in and give it your best shot. You're never going to get a grant if you don't submit it. And I just want to acknowledge that these are the students in my lab who have worked on this project, and then obviously thank the NSF. So.
Hello, my name is Veronica Santos, and I am an associate professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at UCLA. I've been at UCLA for 3 years, and before that I was, for 6 years, an assistant professor at Arizona State. So it's kind of like coming back home here. I direct the biomechatronics lab, and our mission is to improve quality of life by enhancing the functionality of artificial hands and their control in human-machine systems. So we study human, robotic, prosthetic hands, especially tactile sensing, and how artificial tactile sensing can be used to make human-machine interactions, physical interactions, more seamless. So when I was putting this talk together, I thought I'd go back and dig out my career proposal, which was written 8 years ago, and cut out some of the figures. And so on that top row, you can see some of the figures that I put in, and that was my vision at the time. And they're not that different than what we're currently doing now, which is in the second row. We're still doing a lot of studies of human grasp, unimpaired grasp. We have advanced our design with collaborators on tactile sensor skins. The upper right picture, which was my original vision for doing haptic exploration with sensorized robot fingertips, we're doing that on the last 3 images you see on the bottom row. So I really feel that even the act of writing a career proposal was beneficial for just me being able to create a vision and a type of niche for our lab. So these are the stats for my NSF experience. I've served on 10 review panels. I've done 3 separate mail-in reviews. As PI, I've submitted 10 proposals since 2009. Only 4 of them were funded as PI. I've written more as co-I that just weren't funded. But I've received funding from a variety of different programs, cyber physical systems. The career came from SIZE and IAS, as well as the National Robotics Initiative and General Age-Related Disabilities Engineering, which I think has kind of morphed into DARE now. And I did submit my career proposal within 1 year of starting my tenure track position, and I'll explain why in a minute, and it was funded the year after. So, preparing my career proposal, this is what I remember. It's been a while. Before writing, I attended a ton of proposal writing workshops, looked up tips online and things like that. I asked colleagues for examples of their successful career proposals, and I read them, and I told myself to start early. But I didn't listen to that last bullet point, and with less than 1 month to the deadline, I panicked. I should have started early. I should have started 3 months earlier. What am I going to do? I shouldn't waste one of my 3 attempts, and I'm just going to wait till next year. And I was talking to a senior colleague and mentor, and he said, well, have you written a draft yet? I said, no. And he goes, well, how do you know it's not competitive? Why don't you just sit down for 30 minutes, write a draft, write a bullet point outline, and then you think about it, whether you should count yourself out. So I think one of my personal lessons was don't count yourself out before you've begun. Yes, it's going to be crunch time, but put pencil to paper, get your butt in the chair, and just start writing and see what flows out. And if you don't make it for that particular deadline, then at least you have more than a year start for the next one. So after writing a first draft, my colleague said, ask yourself these questions. If you wait 1 more year, will the proposal be any more competitive? Will you still be as excited about your ideas? And more importantly, will your research community still find it novel? Or are other people also kind of thinking along the same lines and they're putting in their proposals to do the same thing? And finally, are your current preliminary data sufficient for demonstrating feasibility? So these are things to ask yourself whether you want to wait another year, and that's why I ended up going through with it. Even though I started late and everything, I was so excited about what I'd written, I thought, well, it has a chance. Let's just put it in. So after I cleaned up my draft, I asked a few trusted colleagues, both inside and outside of my field, so again, the semi-expert idea, and people who had received career awards and not, to provide feedback, and then I still had time to incorporate that feedback. And then I just kept polishing until the deadline. So lessons learned about this is think big and novel, but also recognize that you will have many opportunities in your career to tackle grand challenges. So your proposal has to be feasible. So one of the weaknesses that reviewers noted when I went back and looked at my reviews was that it was too ambitious for a 5-year project with one grad student. So in some sense, it's better to be too ambitious than not ambitious at all, but still, I could have written something that was more feasible. So do not overpromise on your deliverables. But some risk is important, so don't make it incremental. I happen to have my career proposal funded on my first try, but this is not always the case. And I would say the only benefit of that happening is that I didn't have to write another one. But sometimes it actually works out better if your first attempt is not funded. So I have a colleague who had her first time rejected. She went back and spoke in detail with program managers about her project and thought more deeply and revised it, and she ended up getting a P case. So the professional benefits of my career award is that I think just the act of writing it really helped me to craft the vision for what I wanted my lab to be about. It supported the growth of my research program in a variety of complementary directions, which helps you out when you get tenure and now you're looking to collaborate with more people to tackle these big problems. And the award has given me confidence. This is like the kind of soft, fuzzy part of my talk, but the fact that I was awarded it after a rigorous peer review reminds me that I do belong in my field, especially in robotics, where there are not many women. And I've had many opportunities to thrive come my way, and I've had the confidence to say yes to the ones that I think are worthwhile and no to the ones that I need to say no to in order to protect my time. And finally, the award has helped my mobility. I was never looking to leave ASU, but sometimes things happen in personal life or professional life or whatever, and having a career award actually does enhance your mobility. So, some high-level recommendations. As has been said before, speak with program directors about your project. Make sure you're targeting an appropriate program and scope of work. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. And the program may actually have a larger budget than what is listed in the solicitation. This was one of the surprising things I found. I'm not sure about the current funding climate, but I didn't realize that SCIES had a little bit more money. And so the program manager I spoke to told me I could have something like 550 or 560K. So that was true back in the day. Another high-level recommendation is do the hard stuff first. This is what I tell myself and I tell my students, because a lot of people try and just do the easy stuff so they feel like they're making progress, but it's the hard stuff that we avoid doing because we don't know how to do it that is the critical part. So conduct your thorough literature review so that you can clearly identify what your proposed novel contributions will be to the field. Iterate on clear descriptions of novel, feasible research goals and education goals. And there are some items that have lead times that are beyond your control. So if you need letters of support or commitment from maybe principals of elementary schools with whom you would like to work, that's when you need to start cultivating those early. I fortunately had enough time, but had I waited any longer, I wouldn't have gotten any. And also quotes for capital equipment. They're not required, but it's just a nice kind of bonus item so that when people are reviewing your proposal, they realize, wow, she's really thought about this. She's even gone out and made a realistic budget. Other high-level recommendations, make sure you address the intellectual merit and the broader impacts because you will not be funded for one without the other. Clearly state the contributions of your proposed work to your field, and even if you have some amazing potential contributions, if you don't present them and their worth with respect to the literature and the state of the art, you will not be funded. The reviewers are going to say, well, that sounds cool, but has someone done it before? Or how does this relate to what so-and-so was doing just last year? Also, put your best foot forward. So if your presentation is sloppy, your research will also be assumed to be sloppy. And if you were the program manager in charge of the funding and you had a limited amount, you wouldn't give it to someone who can't even write a decent, doesn't take the care to write a good proposal. So some of the low-level practical details when you're writing, I think, are definitely read the solicitation carefully and follow the instructions. So there are going to be some special programs that have very specific things that the reviewers are instructed to look for in addition to intellectual merit and broader impacts. So what I recommend doing, because someone recommended it to me, is copy-paste that directly from the solicitation, put it into your template, and make sure it's there so you don't forget to address them before you turn it in. And make it easy on your reviewers. I mean, we do this at the last minute. We're reading 8 of these, some of them even on the plane ride back. Don't tell anyone. But really, make it easy on us. One thing I heard someone say, and I found it to be true, is that an opinion can be formed about a proposal within the first couple of paragraphs. And after that, it's just a natural tendency to read the rest of the proposal while looking for evidence that support your own first impression. So you have to make a good first impression and draw people in from page 1. Don't wait until page 2 to tell us what you really want to do. And use helpful formatting to draw the eye to key concepts and contributions. I find it helpful for myself to number the goals, and as a reviewer, I appreciate that as well. Make it clear how many things you want to do and why you want to do them, how you're going to do it, and why it's important, and include figures. There's nothing that's more annoying than getting 15 pages of text. So boring to read. A colleague told me include 1 figure per page, but it really depends on what kind of proposal you're writing. I try for 1 every other page, but something to break up the text is very helpful for reviewers. So my last slide. Serve on an NSF review panel. The experience is invaluable. So what's up in that red box there is exactly what we see on the interactive review panel when we need to check the boxes. And we're allowed to check more than 1, but you wouldn't want to do any that are not adjacent pairs. And as Michelle says, you better be getting the excellence and the very goods, because good is not good enough. You have to get a couple of excellence, and you can be borderline excellent, very good, but for context, those were my career proposal review ratings. I wish I'd been told this sooner when I started my assistant professor position. Build 30 minutes of writing into each workday. And writing just means, this is coming from Carrie Ann Rockmore, and I put the link there. I'd be happy to share these slides with folks afterwards. But writing just means doing something that gets an important tenure-related product out the door. That means a journal paper or a proposal or something for which we aren't usually held accountable, like standing up in front of a classroom of students and teaching, right? We really have to be our own time managers for this stuff, and 30 minutes of doing a lit review or drafting an outline or writing a page of something, even if it's a very rough draft, is very useful. And like Spence said before, swing that bat. You got to play to win. You will never get funded for the proposal that you never write. Team composition is important. This is especially important when you start tackling larger problems where your lab cannot realistically tackle that big problem. And finally, even if you have submitted a high-quality proposal, be okay with the fact that there are going to be forces beyond your control that can affect whether you get funded. So my anecdote for this is I wrote a proposal for a doctoral student. It received very good ratings and came back highly competitive, and my program manager said, "I'm sorry I ran out of money. Please try again." And this was with a collaborator. So I wrote it, I revised it, submitted it a second time. Again, lightning struck twice. Good reviews, highly competitive. My program manager said, "I'm sorry, I ran out of money again. I try one more time." And by this time, my collaborator is getting really frustrated. "Veronica, are you sure we should go back? We're wasting our time. Let's go somewhere else." And I said, "No, I think if we just make this one tweak, let's try it again." And that third time, it was finally funded. And by the time it was funded, the student I'd written it for had graduated. But there are going to be things beyond your control, so do what you can to control the quality of your work, and then after that, just go with the flow. All right, good luck.
Hi, my name is Wil Joyner, and I'm an associate professor of bioengineering at George Mason University. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time to give my humble advice on my success in getting a career proposal funded through NSF based on my experience. So I'm the director of the Laboratory for Sensory Motor Integration at George Mason, and we examine how motor and sensory signals are combined to aid movement preparation and perception. So we do this with a number of different techniques. We have people come in and make simple movements with robotics in our laboratory. We also look at more complex motions using motion capture. We track eye movements while subjects perform very simple visual perception experiments. And finally, we use novel imaging techniques to look at muscle activation patterns in both healthy human subjects and patients that have impairments. So to give a outline, or at least a timeline of the process in my career proposal, I started in August of 2012 at George Mason University, and a number of people suggested, hey, you should write a career proposal, you should look into this, it's your first year, you should do this. So in January, I contacted the program officer, talked to her about my ideas, got some feedback. She said, you know, this is something that would be appropriate, I think you should go for it. I started to write in March, and by May, I quickly realized that I did not have enough experience. I did not have enough research, under my belt yet. I did not have enough background for my broader impacts to really write a strong proposal. So I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to hold off and submit next year. Second year, I contacted the same program officer around the same time, February. I said, you know, this is what I'm thinking of. This is what I want to. This is kind of what I want to do. She encouraged me to do it. I went back to the initial proposal, revised that one during the spring, and then in July, I submitted a proposal to 3 directorates, having only talked to one. So that's good. I'm glad that reaction came through. All right. So 3 directorates. I only talked to one. It was reviewed by 2. In December, I heard that my proposal was declined. That was disappointing, but the feedback was very thorough, very thoughtful, very helpful. I took that feedback into account. This time, I talked to the 2 program officers that of the directorates that did review my proposal, got feedback from them. I gave my proposal to a number of people. So I gave them to colleagues inside my department, outside my department. I gave the proposal to my in-laws, my wife. Multiple people gave me feedback. It was extremely helpful. They point out many of the flaws, many of the things that I could do better. I ended up submitting to 1 directorate in July of 2015. And in fact, it was the directorate that gave me the lowest scores. So it was the directorate that I thought that I would have the best shot if I revised the proposal to basically appeal to. In October of that year, the program officer asked me for some additional information. There were some questions that the review panel had. They were excited about what I proposed, but they wanted some questions answered. So I submitted those materials, and in May of 2016, that proposal was awarded. And what I want to point out is that was May of 2016. And this process began in January 2013. So it takes a long time, and it takes perseverance. Everything that everyone has said already. So there are a number of ways that the Career Award has supported the research and the broader impacts of my lab's activities. So one, we have a number of grade school, high school students that come in. We demonstrate our experiments. We give them an idea of why we're studying what we're studying. We also go out to retirement communities and do the same kind of demonstrations to give the general public an idea of why we're studying these things and their impact. The award has supported a number of undergraduate students that have worked in my lab to attend conferences, to conduct their own research. Conferences much like BMES. I have a couple of undergrads here this year. And I've also incorporated a lot of the research into my courses and to supplement some of the topics that we talk about and kind of bolster that information. A lot of this has already been said, but I just want to touch on it just briefly. So my general advice, you need to start early. I would say 6 months to a year. I would say 6 months is probably on the low end, but you need to give yourself enough time to get the feedback, to incorporate those changes, to look at it, revise, and and to really make the best proposal that you can. Definitely talk to the program officer. I can't, everyone has stressed that already, but the program officer holds a lot of information, can give you a lot of feedback if they think that their directorate is the right place to go for your research plan. If you can, I would try to read both successful and unsuccessful proposals. I think you can get a lot from both. You can see what works, you can see what doesn't work. The structure is also really important. You can see, you can incorporate a lot of that into your own writing and into your own proposal. This has already been said too. Be prepared. You need to know what the restrictions are. What do you need to include? What do you need to really take note of when you write these things in terms of like the font even, or even the margins. Pay attention to detail. Typos, figures, white space. A well put together proposal goes a long way, I think, in increasing enthusiasm. If it's sloppy, this was already said, if it looks sloppy, people are going to have a negative view of the research that you're trying to propose, even if that's not the case. Descriptive headings, if you let people know where you're going, if you give some structure to your proposal, this section is going to talk about this. These paragraphs are going to be discussing this. I think that's helpful to guide the reader through your proposal. Revise, take a break, revise. I don't believe in going 4 days of just working on the same thing. I think you need to take a break in order to see with fresh eyes some of the things that you may not have caught on the first day. It's also helpful to provide an overview of your objectives. How do they connect? If you can give some pictorial view of, these are the objectives I'm trying to accomplish. This is how they all kind of tie together. This is how this ties into my broader impacts. That goes a long way in helping the reviewer. So to give you an example, I talked about in the beginning that my lab studies these different signals and how they basically come together. And this is a diagram that's well known in my field. And I use this in my proposal. And I gave a sense of these are the objectives of what I'm trying to basically look at, and how they basically tie into this overall picture of the sensory motor integration. And a lot of reviewers, or not a lot, but at least several of the reviewers noted that this was very helpful in understanding what I was trying to accomplish. Have multiple people read your proposal. So that would be probably the number one thing that I would recommend. I know it sounds funny, but my in-laws were probably the most helpful feedback I got. They both had science degrees. They did not do, they were not in the field that I was in, but they had a strong background in science, and they knew when things sounded, very clear, and they gave me feedback on, you should probably change this, so you may want to adjust this. Extremely helpful. Both inside and outside your scientific field would also be extremely helpful feedback. Submitting to multiple directorates. So, don't do that. I think that there's a very thin line that you can really basically appeal to multiple audiences. I read when I made that mistake. I read the scope of these 3 directorates. There was a lot of overlap, and I thought, well, this probably applies to all 3, so it's going to increase my chances, right, if I apply to all 3. And trying to basically meet the expectations and the priorities of 3 different directorates, 3 different panels is, I think, almost impossible. You definitely can talk to the program officers to get a sense of if your proposal really meets that fine line between multiple directorates, but in general, I would probably recommend against it. If you can, this has already been said too, it's definitely helpful to serve on a review panel. You get a better feel for what works, what doesn't work in the evaluation process. It's definitely helped my writing. It's definitely helped my proposal, my subsequent proposals after serving on multiple review panels. So if you have the opportunity, I strongly recommend doing that. Persistence pays off. I agree. If you don't submit, you will not get funded. Don't be discouraged if your proposal is declined. One of my advisors once said that we are in the business of rejection, and you have to know that some of what you put out there may get rejected, but that's okay. You have to keep trying. Last, if your proposal is declined, take stock of the comments and turn deficiencies into strengths. On the first submission, one of the reviewers pointed out that you claim something that I don't think is necessarily true, or at least I don't think has been actually established. And I use that as an objective for my revision. And a couple of the reviewers pointed out that is a good objective because this is really unknown. And I wouldn't have known to do that without the comments of the reviewers. And I think in general, most reviewers want to be helpful. So in closing, I just wanted to thank my lab. There's a number of undergrads and undergraduate and graduate students that have participated in the research that the Career Award funds, and I also want to thank the sponsors of the funding agencies of my research as well. Thank you. I hope that was helpful.
Okay, I'm going to invite the rest of our panelists up, and then what we're going to do, we're going to let them say a few words, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So please start recording your questions on paper, and Dr. Lee and Dr. Dickinson, if you want to join us as well. So you guys we'll put one of them here. Okay. So Delphine, do you want to start us off?
So hi, I'm Delphine Dean. I'm an associate professor at Clemson University in bioengineering. And as was mentioned, I have a career award. It's about to end. And I've reviewed for both career and unsolicited panels. And is that it? Or should I go through? Okay. I think a lot of kind of the advice has been said, but from the perspective of a reviewer, the writing thing, making it easy to understand, I think is like the number one. As someone mentioned, like in the first page, you have to grab the reviewer's attention. The panels are kind of broad, so if I get a pile of proposals to review, there are some that are totally in my area, and I'm pretty good of an expert on that, so you better impress me. But then there are, most of them are kind of tangentially related to what I do. And so being clear about what you're trying to do. And then if something is really novel, say that it's novel and really back it up. But if you have like lots of people working in that space, don't say something's novel when you're really doing an incremental change. Because we will Google stuff. So you know, if you're making some new thing and you're whatever it's called, and I type it into Google or PubMed and I get 100 references, that's not really novel. So really make a clear case. A couple tips on the grant writing that I think no one's mentioned, but I think are helpful. There's things like the letters and things like that that's, you know, are a little bit outside of your control. You want to get them in, and you want to get them in early. Sometimes stuff doesn't happen, and there will be a letter missing. I will not notice as a reviewer, maybe, if when you have it in the text, like, I will be doing this activity with Dr. So-and-so, in parentheses, see letter. If the letter is not there, that I will notice. If you don't say see letter, I might not notice it's not there. So my tip is don't put see letter in parentheses. It really doesn't do anything. It takes up space. So that, I think, hasn't been mentioned, but I thought that was useful as a tip. And then for career proposals, the integration of education and research is really important, and we are tasked very heavily to review that. And I think there are proposals that review very well because they have great research and good, solid educational research plans. There are proposals that review very well because, you know, it's a good, solid research plan, but it's an awesome educational plan, but you need both. You can't have a really awesome research plan and kind of a throwaway or really not innovative or something that you would do for an unsolicited proposal. That doesn't cut it for a career plan. So again, read people's proposals and get those in. So those are things that, I guess, for me.
Okay, so I'm Kai-Ming Yi, and the professor, also department chair. I probably can provide you the experience from both sides. I was the program director for the biomedical engineering. I was also the NSF grant awardee, and also currently has the active NSF on research work. And I also have a grant from NIH, so I review for both NSF grant and also NIH grants, and from different levels, from individual research grants to the center grant. So just want to emphasize, as point out repeatedly, it's very important when you write a grant, you have to way ahead of time, really sit down and prepare and make sure your story be carried and through writing. So in other words, really you structure your proposal very well. Very often, and we review the proposal and we try to understand what the problem and the applicant try to solve. And only thing we understand of the halfway. So in the beginning, of course, you want to talk about a background. You want to demonstrate your approach, taking the problem you try to tackle is really important. But don't spend too much time and too much pages talking about the problem. You need to, from very beginning, almost the first sentence, clearly tell the reviewer what problem you want to solve and why they're so important. And also followed by the solution you're going to offer. Then you're going to convince the reviewer why you are qualified, you have the solution to the problem you want to solve. It's very clear, which I always mention about you have only 1 minute to convince the reviewer. And this proposal was for him or for her to continue to read it. And that's very important. So it's almost, you're talking about NIH proposal 12 pages, NSF 15 pages, and be honest to you, you only have half page. It's only half page, and you need to convince the reviewer. Otherwise, you're already lost. So that's very important. Keep that in mind. And it's not 12 pages, not 15 pages, it's half page. So it's very important. Second, I want to share with you experience. Of course, we all have, when you receive the reviews comments, if the review comments are very positive, you receive a very good score, you're so excited, and then it could be funded. But more often, and most time, 95% of the time, you receive the comment scores very disappointing. We disappoint you, and which I always tell the people, and so I'll tell myself and with assistant professors, you only have 1 night to be excited or upset. And next day, when early morning you wake up, you really look at the reviews comments in a positive way. We heard a lot of complaining and say so reviewers didn't spend time to read the proposal. He didn't understand what I'm trying to propose. Just try to find some reason to kill that proposal. So and don't think in that way. So say you have 1 night and to think in that way if that's really truly believe that. But when you wake up the next morning, you need to look at those reviewers' comments positively. You want to think why they're thinking that way. There must be something you didn't convey very clearly and cross the problem. So I think that's basically you need to be very, very careful. So I can go on to tell you a lot of experience, but I think that this is 2 points is very, very important, critical. So,
Rich, do you want to?
Sure. My name is Rich Dickinson. I'm the new division director at CBET, and that includes the Michelle's program, as well as Cheng Zhang, who's not here yet, in the nanobiosensing. So I can speak to you from a perspective as the division director, but also someone who was a department chair for 8 years, and I've tried to mentor many young faculty through successfully getting career awards and getting through the tenure process. The advice that I heard today was just fantastic. I can hardly think of a point that wasn't already covered, but I just wanted to emphasize a couple. One, don't put in a poor proposal. It's not just because you're going to get rejected inevitably, but it's something that you're really sending a body of your work to several people to take a look at, and not only the people who actually review the proposal, but the whole panel who may scoff at the fact that it was a horrible proposal and it's on the bottom of the list. And your name's on the bottom of a list of a list of 20 people, 20 competitors in the field. So it's really not. It leaves an impact that you may not know if you don't really know how the reviews are done. So it's not worth it. I mean, that doesn't mean you have to be perfectionist on every proposal, obviously, but if you just know it's not going to be worth it, but you feel pressure from your department chair to put it in anyway, or your mentor, it's not worth it at the end of the day. And try to, especially for the career award, you want to try to inspire the panel with some sort of vision for your career, and that's a big part of it. They're going to be a little bit softer in terms of the expectations on the actual science. It's got to be novel, but a lot of them understand you're a new investigator in the field, and part of the career is to sort of map the process of writing the proposals to map out your future and the impact you're going to make in your career. So if you can set that vision and inspire the panel, they're already going to be on your side to try to give you as much help in a way as possible. It's already been mentioned, just the quality of the images and the number of images are very important. For an unsolicited proposal, if you want to tap into your institution's outreach activities to support your activities, I recommend it. Everything doesn't have to be completely new. It doesn't have to be something completely innovative for the unsolicited. For the educational component of the career, it should be something more innovative and new, but still don't be shy about using. A lot of institutions, most now have some sort of outreach center where they can help you with the broader impacts. The broader impact, so this sometimes is a point of confusion. The outreach activities and the broadening participation activities are very important, but don't only present those activities. A critical error, and some reviewers may not make a big deal out of it. I've seen many proposals rejected just because it was unclear where's the broader impact of the actual proposed research. And that's got to be in there somewhere. Otherwise, you're not really fulfilling that criteria. In terms of outreach activities, and this is true for the science too, it's the outreach activities. It's really the quality and the innovation of those activities, not the quantity. So if you have many different little things that you're going to do, and I'm going to have some students come to class, I'm going to go to the classroom and help a teacher, and if you list all these things. The panel has seen all these things many times in all the other proposals. So if you can really focus on one activity, it doesn't have to be a major time sink. It just has to be something significant. I think everything else has been said. So again, I think you really congratulate the great panel of great feedback and advice, and a nice job. Oh, yeah, let me mention something. I don't want to counter you, only because you made a point that so I'm actually the opposite.
Yeah.
So if I see the C letter and I go look for the letter and I don't see it, that would be less problematic for me than if there was a comment that said I'm going to collaborate with this person and I don't have any letter and I don't see a letter, because I would actually flag that as a concern. But
it depends on the wording.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple, but anyway, on the broader impact part, outreach for the career proposal, on some of the panels I've been in, if it looks like my grad student is going to go to a middle school and do this, my grad student is going to do that, it doesn't read as well as if you are doing stuff. So you can't just say your students are going to do all the outreach. You have to be involved in it for the career. I think that seems to be a pitfall, or at least in the panels I've seen. Bam.
Any other comments right now? All right, so we started receiving questions, and some of these are really straightforward, but what I'm going to do is ask a question and then just have somebody volunteer to answer it, and if you guys point back at me, then I will answer the question. Okay, first one, where can I get examples of successfully funded research proposals? Anybody?
Okay, I can jump in. So I think there's couple of ways, and you can call your colleagues, and somebody can share with you within your university, within the unit, or you can find on the website. NSF has a awardee list on the website, and you can reach out to those current awardee or past awardee and ask them whether they will willing to share the successful proposal with you. And also NSF has an open policy. Michelle can give you more on detailed instructions. And basically, every award proposal is it should be the public domain, and they should be able to share those proposals with you. Am I correct?
NSF cannot share a proposal. NSF can only share the abstract, but you can go to the NSF website and see what's been awarded and then contact those PIs. And hopefully they're proud enough of their work that they'll be willing to share their proposals with you.
Isn't there like a Freedom of
Yeah, it is. And
I think.
correct.
So that would be, I think, did any of you take advantage of that? Did you have that at did your institution provide you with resources?
So, yes, I think you're absolutely correct. So for us, we also do the same thing. So we basically, for any investigator, they ask for the successful story, our research foundations basically share with them and all the successful story, the proposals. So yes, we do. It's individual levels.
Many institutions also will have a career workshop, writing workshop, and
Correct.
definitely take advantage of that. And then a lot of times you'll have a recently successful proposal.
So something was mentioned about FOIA. I've never been told there's a mechanism for me to hand over proposals.
There is, to my understanding, but it's a process. It's not as simple as just downloading it, but
So
Just
reach
email
out to
your
your
friends.
institution.
I actually got someone putting in a FOIA request for my proposal, and I just emailed them, and I'm like, you could have emailed me, here's my proposal. So, just like,
I actually, well, it's a long time ago, but, so yeah, actually, that happened to me, and I said no, and because I suspected it was a collaborator who wanted to tap into what I had in my design on an instrument that I wanted to at least take advantage of while I was, I had it in mind. So, not a collaborator, excuse me, a competitor.
Just, Chen Zhang, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, because we just run another international funding workshop in the neighborhood. Okay, I'm new program director of nanobiosensing, and basically my program interested in research in the field of biomedical device, and in particular for biosensing design, fabrication, and also in the application as well. Okay, and we do run the career proposal and also unsolicited proposal as well.
Okay, so the next question, and the reason we're doing it this way is that the webinar is being recorded, and last year the questions were not intelligible, so we're trying to make sure that the people who watch the recording can actually hear what's being answered. Can we be a reviewer without having any NSF NIH award? What are the minimum requirements to be a reviewer or panelist? Anybody want to take it?
Yes. I'll just say real quick. So I got advice right when I started my first my assistant professor job to reach out to the relevant program officer. I emailed him, sent him my CV, said I'd love to come review for you, and he asked me within that first year. So I don't know what the minimum requirement is, but
I learned today I was a postdoc, and I didn't know that today.
Yeah, the minimum is that you have to have a PhD. I put a couple of postdocs on panels, not necessarily career panels, but I'll put assistant professors who are not career awardees on career panels, a couple of them. I'll put postdocs on unsolicited panels. So you have to have a PhD, and you have to volunteer. And each program director asks for different things. So I don't actually have time to look at the CV. I ask for bulleted areas of research expertise because it's a heck of a lot easier for me to put that in my database than to pull it out of a CV. So
I would definitely recommend if you're a postdoc, and as Michelle mentioned, there's some cards you can fill out. What a wonderful experience to see the review process from the other side before you submit your first proposal.
Well, I would add, we got many email requirements want to be served as a reviewer. So when you submit your requirement or when you can contact your program director, you better write a short paragraph to describe your training background and also your expertise. And then we can see, okay, your training background really fit in the program or not. Then I put you into the database. When they run the panel, we can invite you to be the panelist.
okay, so next question. Is there a necessity of a publication preceding a career application? So do you have to have published the work, the preliminary data, before you submit your career?
On the topic or generally on that topic?
I would say on that topic, because we're assuming that anybody who's graduated hopefully has at least one publication out there, but thoughts?
I would say it depends on how close it is. If you're completely far afield and you're proposing a new area, it may raise a red flag. But because it is supposed to be something, a new direction for your research, then I would say no, you probably don't need a publication yet right on that topic.
like compared for NSF versus NIH reviews, you want to have them published. In NSF, it was less of an emphasis on having it be actually a publication already.
Yeah, I've talked to PIs, and one of the things I've said is, if you have something submitted, no, we don't necessarily like to include submitted publications on our biosketches, but you can put a submitted publication as a reference in your reference list, right? So you can say, hey, I've got enough that I've actually submitted this, and here's the reference. So that's an indication you're working towards it. When I run a panel, especially for career, I emphasize that it has the PI presented enough preliminary data that you think they can do the work. We all know what publication schedules are like. We all know that things happen. So and Delphine can attest to this, if I keep hearing, well, they haven't published it, or I bring them back to, no, can they do the work? That's the key piece of information that we want to look at.
I've been on NIH Career Development Award panels, and that is different. On NIH Career Development Award panels, they count papers.
Okay, so this one's a challenging one, but say you've been working with a program director and she encourages you to apply. Then you're ready to apply and you found out she's leaving the NSF the month before your deadline. I can foresee this happening for careers coming in this July. And they haven't replaced her yet. Okay, so Rich, we've got to replace me.
Sounds really familiar.
And you can't talk to the new program director. What are your suggestions for someone in this case? What if the new director is very different? Any ideas, suggestions?
Good luck. Well, you should answer that because
Yeah,
you're
well,
new. So.
because I'm the new program director. You know, I think I spent about 2 weeks work with my peers program director all together, trying to understand, you know, of course, my peers program director introduced me a lot of basics. What about the program, how I found the career proposal, whatever. In the first year, I would say I will follow whatever he said. But in my second year, maybe third year, I may change that. So I would say it should be okay in the first year transition. And basically, I will follow whatever my peers program director said, what he interesting, how he found. Then later on, maybe, you know, next year, year after, I will do my own. Yeah, it's a,
There should be some continuity. Yeah.
So I just want to add on another point. I think it's from the reviewer perspective and from the grantship perspective. I don't think it's your science when you write proposals. You know, you shouldn't too much depending on, and it's who you know. It's really depending on what you ask yourself and what is this big scientific question you're going to ask. What is a big scientific problem you're going to tackle? Of course, you want to align your research interest and your proposal with the mission of the program, and that you have to align. But at the same time, and you need to really ask whether this is the big science problem you're going to tackle. So, and programs in the NSF doesn't change very often. It doesn't change very often. It also will not be changed overnight. There is a period, a transition period. Even there is a change, you will hear from the communities, and the word's going to spread around. You still have time to adjust it, to prepare. But I don't think that's what you need to focus. Your focus is focus on the science and really focus on how well you prepare, and that's you should focus on. I don't think you should focus on and try to those kind of things.
Okay, next. On the budget, is it best to aim high, expecting to be slashed, i.e. ask for 3 grads for 4 years, expecting to get 2 grads for 3 years? And how much equipment is it reasonable to ask for? Anybody want to tackle that one?
No. Is this even on? It's on. I would ask for what you need. I've seen, having served on review panels, budgets that exceeded double what you suggested in the beginning of the session, and I think that turns off a lot of reviewers. So please don't do that.
I just want to add on another point. So when you work on a budget, you have to be reasonable, and in other words, don't try to play the number, and make sure all the number you put there is reasonable. It's justified. And I share with you my personal experience when I work on submit my first career applications, and I read it on the line says minimum it's $400,000 at that time, And I didn't realize also minimum is a maximum. So then I asked for, because I follow the NIH R1 and experience, I asked for $1.5 million. Okay? So that's why, you know, it's you have to be very careful and to read it between the line and don't try to, you know, see those numbers. You really make sure all the number you put there is justified. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. In general, at NSF, I don't cut budgets just for the sake of cutting budgets, and I know at NIH that might happen. But if you are putting in a proposal with a budget that comes into the guideline levels, I'm not just going to cut it just because I'm cutting everybody. That's not how I work. If you are putting in a budget that is much higher than your program officer will fund at. And I have pretty strict guidelines on what are my maximum cutoffs. So if you put in a project with a much higher budget than that and the panel does not think that you can feasibly do the work for a reduced budget, you're unlikely to get funded. Because if I can't figure out how you can reduce the budget but still do the work that you claimed you were going to do, then that's not going to be a fundable proposal. Okay, and on equipment, it doesn't matter as long as it's within the scope of the budget. You just can't ask for more. So if you really need a large piece of equipment, look at the Major Research Initiative, the MRI program, to get major pieces of equipment. Okay, for regular proposals, are collaborators necessary? Anyone? Yep.
Sure. I commented earlier that team composition is really important, and I've had recently I've been submitting larger collaborative proposals as the PI, pulling in people from other universities, and we'll get feedback back, hey, your team seems really well qualified. Where is the expert in this? And so that's, you know, now we got to go through another revision and find another person to add, and that will affect the budget and all that, but it would be a stronger proposal. So I think if it depends on what you're pitching. If you are going to tackle an interdisciplinary problem that requires expertise beyond your own lab, then yes, collaborators are critical, and finding the right ones. And I've also had feedback that says, well, you proposed to collaborate with so-and-so who's listed as a co-I, but you have no publications with that person, which is a bummer and true, but it may take you one funding cycle to already, you know, for the next time you can actually say, look, we've got this journal publication, which is what we're going to do this time. So yes, in that sense, publications are important because some people are specifically looking for pre-established collaborations. But when I'm a reviewer, I give a little bit of leeway because I understand that, you know, you may come up with a really interesting idea. The time is right for that idea with regards to what the research community is doing, and journal publications take a long time. So when someone says they've already started a collaboration and they demonstrate that they have preliminary data, I don't care that they don't have a reference that said it's already in press or published.
So I just want to add on, you know, it's not a question, just echo the comments she just made. I think it's just like the comments when made out about the budget, and it's down to the question is whether the collaboration is justified. So, you know, the question you ask whether you should have a collaborator, and that's the wrong way to ask. You're already wrong from the very beginning if you ask this question. Because you need to think about it if the collaboration is scientifically justified and whether you need somebody to collaborate in the complementary expertise and can offer to the team, you can use in the team science to tackle the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary problems. If the answer is no, and you shouldn't and add it to it because you cannot justify it. Because all the reviewers sitting on a panel, they look at whether and you really need somebody to help you to fulfill to implement the research plan you proposed. So you need to look at a justification. It's very, very important. So.
I was just going to add one last comment to that. One of the panels or the proposal I reviewed on the last panel had a really high budget, and when I got through looking at the personnel, they had like 7 full professors listed on the proposal with many overlapping areas of expertise, and it wasn't clear how they were contributing, and that really came out as a negative too. So you don't need to force collaborations that aren't needed.
And I'll just add, explain in the budget justification what the role of every individual is going to be. And that's a great place to do it because it's not page limited. So you're not taking up the precious space within your project description to do that, but make sure it's clear. And that affects what I'll allow in terms of budget. So if it's a truly multidisciplinary, I'll give a little bit more leeway on budget. But if you're just faking it, then it'll be pretty obvious.
I'd like to add one more thing, which is, as a reviewer, if you see a proposal where it looks like 3 different people wrote their sections independently and then threw them together and said, yeah, we're going to collaborate, but there's no clear evidence that there will actually be scientific collaboration, collaboration between the labs, information transfer and skill transfer across the labs, that's a huge red flag.
Okay.
There's one number I can tell you. In my program, I think single PI, probably about like 40% proposal are single PI. So which means collaboration is good, but it's not really required, depending on the nature of your research.
Okay. If an excellent proposal is declined, will you still revise it? If not, how do you ensure the proposal is still novel in the 2nd or 3rd year? Any ideas?
So I can start it, so maybe Dolphin can add it to it. And I think it's really I can share you on the experience from both the NSF, the review panel, and also NIH review panels. So it used to NIH review panels stay in every time when you resubmit a proposal, go to the same reviewers. Now NIH changed the rule. So every time you assign to the new reviewers. And you can get a score, very, fundable score this round's review, and the next time could be unscored. And that's basically NSF, the same way when I sit in a review, I think it's Michelle and they can add more. And it's always to treat you as a new proposer, as a new reviewers, look at a proposal. So, and I think it's really the innovation you have to ask yourself, and it's not ask yourself whether this is innovative and it's truly talking. As again, I've been talking about the science, it matters. It's not try to guessing. And when you write a proposal, the worst scenario is you try to sit in there guess. And who's going to review it, how the reviewer is going to view your proposal, view your application, this round, the next round. And that's totally wrong. You should not sit in there guessing. It should have a very solid ground, and you have something to stand on and tell yourself, and you ask your peers and your senior faculty in your departments, ask your friend, ask your previous mentor, and to really look at proposal and ask their opinion whether they view this as innovative and transformative proposals.
Yeah, I think from personal having put in proposals and on the reviews. So I got my career proposal funded on the 3rd time. Everybody else here got it like 1st or 2nd. Mine took 3 times. And I actually, the thing that made the biggest difference was changing programs. So I think making sure you're the right program fit makes a difference. But the 2nd time I got terrible reviews. I think it's probably worst score I've gotten on a proposal. But the question that was there is like, what are the reviewers actually saying, right? Is it that they think the idea is cool, you don't have enough preliminary data, then hey, doing 1 more year and getting that preliminary data is useful. Is it that they're really not liking the idea? So if they really don't like the idea, is that because it's not novel enough or you didn't make the case well enough for them to see that? Or is it that it really doesn't fit into what they're seeing, which, and for my case, I think that's what happened. Because you could tell they wanted all this stuff, and I'm like, that's not the point. So I think that makes a difference. And NIH, right, you have that page where you're answering what the review before said. And you have to really, it doesn't, like whatever those reviewers says, you better answer it. Because even though it's new reviewers, they look at what was the previous review. NSF doesn't have that, right? So you don't answer the reviewers, write a good proposal, write something that sounds cool. Yeah.
And if you were lucky enough, unlucky enough to get really solid scores with very few weaknesses and not get funded, go back through. Hopefully you've done work over the last year. Hopefully you haven't just been sitting in your lab twiddling your thumbs. So update your preliminary data. update the framework, what's the state of the art, and continue to emphasize what's novel about it. And if you found out that there have been 10 publications that have just done what you proposed to do in the last 12 months, maybe consider working on some sort of different topic. But don't just resubmit the same proposal, even if it did come in with excellence and very goods, but you didn't get funded.
All excellent. That'd be very
Yeah,
unusual,
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't think that's
The review analysis we would have to write to not fund a proposal with all excellence would be really nasty, so.
So I just want to add on another point. Don't sacrifice science just to satisfy the review's comments. I share you with the experience which I had. My first R01, and when I load this R01, I submit one study session, they come back, says you need to add a mathematical modeling to describe a system. And then I took to those, it says, and then add all the mathematical modeling, try to describe the process, and resubmit. And then I come back to receive their score and the review's comment and say, why you add all this mathematical modeling? It's useless. I was confused. And they told me, says, you have to add those mathematical modeling, and so critical, so important, you're an engineer, you're good at math, you should put everything there. Then I satisfied this group of reviews comments, put everything there, and I come back, say, useless. You put this things, it doesn't make any sense. So that's just experience share you. Don't sacrifice the science. You make sure and you have a ground to stand, and so every time when you revise it, take the reviews comments constructively, really thinking whether that fit on the proposal, your idea, and really you can make a case.
And just to follow up, I think in 12 months, you have 12, right, or less than 12 months by the time it gets rejected and you have time to resubmit. It's not, if it was novel to start with, it's still probably novel. If, as Michelle said, 12 papers came out, then it probably wasn't novel to begin with. So I don't think you should be worried about that so much as what did the reviewers point out. Even if you had a great review, there's always comments, right? Even if I give an excellent, or usually there's something in there. So try to tweak it based on what they say, but take it with a grain of salt.
Okay. As for the previously funded projects, remember there's a section of an NSF proposal that requires you to report on previous NSF funding. Can we list those from our graduate student times, i.e. when we were not PI or co-PI? Anybody want to tackle that?
Repeat that again.
So for the previous results of previous NSF funding section, can we list the projects from when we were graduate students and not PI or co-PI? Okay,
Why would you?
Yeah, that's the answer. There's no need to. Don't use the space, okay? The requirement is if you were a PI or a co-PI on any NSF-funded project in the last 5 years, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with the proposal you are submitting, you must list one and discuss what was accomplished. So don't forget, if you were a co-PI on an REU Site Award or an educational award, you must list that if it's in the last 5 years. But there's no need to do it if you don't have previous funding as a PI or co-PI. So use that space for something else. Okay, how does the NSF view ex vivo studies, i.e. deriving cells or tissues or organs from live animals for fundamental studies on, for example, how a biomaterial interacts with those cells, tissues, or organs? Okay, that's a very specific question. Delphine?
I reviewed a bunch of those on some panels, so that's okay. It has to be, again, scientific, what are you trying to do? It has to be the right model for what you're doing, but that seems okay.
Yeah, so NSF will support work in a dish, in an animal, in a human, if it's appropriate to the size of the study, but no full clinical studies. So that's the guideline. Okay, can a solely computational PI write a grant with an experimental collaborator to satisfy the validation requirement in the proposal? Delphine?
Yes.
And I would say, if need be, if you want to point to validation, the literature is still a valid way to validate a model, right? So, I mean, you can go out to, if you can get good data from the literature, feel free to use that. Just describe what you're going to use.
But that is a good example of a positive collaboration that we were talking
Right.
about earlier. If you're strictly computational and you have a good experimental collaborator, that's great.
Yep, absolutely. Can an investigator win a career award if they've previously won an unsolicited award? Short answer.
Yes.
Okay. And is there an NSF equivalent to the NIH Kangaroo Transition to Independence Award? Short answer.
Not really.
No.
So having been on review panels for both, the career award is the closest thing. And in terms of the discussions we have in the panel for both, there are some things that are similar. So you want to see an independent career. You want to see something that's like a career, not just a project. There are differences. So again, for the publication count and all that kind of stuff, that matters at NIH way more than it did in the NSF panel. And the broader impact outreach education plan is, in terms of what your outreach is, matters at NSF. It doesn't matter on the Kangaroo. The education plan for the candidate matters on the Kangaroo.
Okay, for NSF career, how do reviewers take into consideration a new faculty member's release time if he or she comes from primarily undergraduate institutions? Any thoughts?
So I think it is release time should be very clearly documented in the department chair's letter. But I think it's for the undergraduate institutions, and that should be, should be very clearly documented. And I don't think as reviewers take those look at it, because reviewers read the department chair letter very, very carefully. So that's why you want to make sure, and those commitments and those teaching relief really clearly document in the letters. So I don't think there is any clear rules when they review in their mind and how do the reviewers, whether or not, or how much, for example, one course relief or two course relief, and how much time should be relief. I don't think as reviewers think about that, but the reviewer is looking at whether there is a department chair has a clear thought about how to support, and the applicants can do the research and in the very productive way.
I think on the unsolicited and the career panels I've been at, Michelle mentioned to annotate if you're from a primarily undergraduate institution, and I've reviewed proposals where it wasn't clear. Like, if you really dug into it, you're like, wait a second, they don't have PhDs, but it wasn't clearly stated, and that completely changed the panel's view of the proposal, because it was cool, but you're like, why are they funding master's students, right? Whereas if they'd just said that at the beginning, it was suddenly like, oh my God, this project is amazing. So definitely.
Don't hide that fact.
Yeah, in bold at the top.
Okay, what is a typical budget breakdown for career awards? Does NSF like to see dollars allocated in certain proportions, faculty effort, student support, equipment, and supplies? Go ahead.
Okay, so it's, again, it's about the justification. So whether you will be able to justify all the items and I think it's you have two different ways. You can read in a very in a subjective way, or you try to provide the detailed information on the budget and how do you spend in each items. So it's all about the justifications. I don't think, if you can, as long as you can justify and you have a freedom, because, and is a PI and oriented or driven the proposers. So you decide what to do, and the panel will decide whether the decision you make makes sense or can really help you to effectively implement research plans.
As a reviewer for careers, I also checked to see if they had budget allocated for their outreach activities. If their outreach activities needed some budget, it needs to be there. So like if you're traveling somewhere to go to schools and things, it needs to be in there. If you need supplies for that, some bit in there.
And I think that, again, going back to the justification, you should be able to justify the effort of the different people that are on the proposal. So, don't just fund summer salary for yourself. You need to have the students fund the grad student who's actually going to be in the lab doing the work that you're proposing. And I sat on a review panel where there were some negative comments made about a proposal because the proposal had 0 grad students funded. It was 1 postdoc. And although, you are also training a postdoc, I think the fact that there was no training of graduate students reflected poorly in the review process.
That's a very common point of view, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it varies, and unfortunately, most times you can't fit a grad student and a postdoc in the same budget. So if you have other mechanisms to support graduate students, you're not going to list them on the proposal because NSF does not support, does not allow cost sharing, but you could describe the fact that you have startup funds that support to graduate students and therefore you're using this budget for a postdoc or something like that. So there are ways around it without listing those individuals. It also looks really badly. We had a proposal recently that had not a fully funded PhD student. It was a partially, I think it was an hourly rate or something like that. And so people asked how was this student actually going to be able to live on the support that they were going to get. So think about that. The dirty little secret is there is no minimum required by NSF effort from the PI, okay? You're not allowed to say that you're going to put 10% effort in but not request any salary. That's that no cost sharing rule again. When I talk to panels, I say, just assume that the PI is going to be putting in more time than they budget for themselves because they've run out of money and so they're trying to pay their student or their postdoc first. It's unfortunate, but it's the way that we have to deal with things. So if that's your decision to reduce your support, go by your institution's guidelines, but there's no set minimum effort like there are in some of the NIH awards.
Just add one little tips. And if you have any doubt, any question, I think the most helpful resource and you can get to help is go to talk to your department chair and talk to your research response office. And to get the helps and to ask them this kind of question. Don't sit in there guessing and try to guess whether it is allowed or it is not allowed. And most time, I can guarantee you, 95% time, your guess is wrong. Get help, get a clarification, so before you do it.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point. The cost sharing is not allowed, right? So if you say, well, I'm getting funding from somewhere else to support a student, then it could create an issue there.
Put it in the facilities, not in the budget justification. I learned that from our Division of Grants Administration. Okay, I have volunteered to serve on review panels several times, but have not been contacted. Should I follow up more often? If so, with who? When is a good time of year? All right, so chat with the program director about how they manage panels. The way I do it is I have a database of 600 and growing potential reviewers. I put out calls based on how I see I'm going to divide up panels for a particular review cycle. And my first question is, please let me know if you're available on this date. I then build the panel based on expertise, diversity of institutions, diversity of panelists, all sorts of different factors. Other program directors reach out in narrower areas, will reach out to specific people that they know to build their panels. So you need to understand how your program director actually builds their panels to do that. But always follow up. Hopefully most program directors hand over their list of reviewers to the next program director, but that's not guaranteed. So if there's a new program director, make sure you get in touch with them if you're interested in reviewing for that panel. So any other ideas, guys, on how to make best use of that?
My first panel I reviewed at was not really in my area at NSF, but it was kind of, the program manager was looking for someone with my expertise because of a proposal in that thing, and that was very helpful. So I think don't just look at the one program that you think you're going to apply to. There are lots of programs. Biomedical engineering is very broad, so there are lots of programs that you may fit into as a reviewer. It was a physics panel, and it really helps. It just helps to read those proposals.
I think I want to add one comment. Is in my program, I assemble the panel. I would consider the junior faculty or senior faculty to make the balance. Because the panel is, of course, the purpose to review the proposal. Another purpose, I think, is to educate our junior faculty to give them more experience to learn how, how we run the NSF proposals. So in my case, I kick the balance, junior, senior, and tenure, non-tenure faculties.
Anybody else?
It's a many times I think this is a good chance to talk to the contact the program. I share you my personal experience and how I get this get on my first NSF panel reviewers and just like this kind of meeting, BMES meeting. So I talked to the program director at that time, and I say, well, I don't have any experience, right? Any NSF proposals. Can I get on the panel reviewers? He said, oh, give me the business card. I handed my business card, and 1 month later, I got a call, say, are you waiting to come to serve on a panel? I said, of course. I was so excited. So that's what I'm saying. So this is very good, to utilize this experience, and many times program director come to this kind of meeting and interact with them and make a request because you already have the personal contacts, very highly possibility you will get selected for, you will get a call.
I'm just going to build on what Delphine said. So seeing as you cannot serve as a reviewer in a program, if you have submitted to that cycle, okay, contact multiple program directors about serving as a panelist, because if you are actually being submitting regularly, you will lock yourself out of reviewing for that program that you are submitting to. So find another program that is related and see if you can do reviews for them, because you can do that. You just can't review for the program that you've submitted to. Okay, so a couple of questions. Are there any more cards out there that people have written questions down on since we've been up here? All right, there's a question here regarding examples of biomechanics. Can we give some examples in biomechanics of basic versus applied projects? For a similar research area, some examples of how an applied project could be proposed as basic science of interest to NSF. That's one of those questions I would generally follow up with a program director with instead of, but does anybody have any thoughts?
Well, I'll make one comment on that. So I submit proposals to both NIH and NSF, and I do biomechanics, orthopedic biomechanics. So an example it might be if you're seeking to understand a particular type of injury, so I've done stuff in the rotator cuff and the shoulder, so trying to understand how this actual condition happens and treatments for it or something is different from a fundamental understanding of how does that tendon actually work. So I've had projects in both of those kind of areas. The fundamental question I send to the NSF, and the more specific disease condition I send to the NIH. But I'd be happy to talk to him about that after.
All right, so there's a kind of a reference on here to about a chair letter for regular proposals. Just to be clear, the chair's letter, the long chair's letter, is only for career proposals. You do not need it for any others. Please encourage your chair to actually write a personalized letter. There was a panel we had this year where the chair's letter was, the chair obviously, I'm not going to presuppose gender, the chair obviously was trying to be efficient and was writing multiple letters, and it actually said he/she. Not good. And it's terrible when that can have a negative impact on a PI, but please work with your chair, draft the first draft of the letter. They can always modify it, but tell them that that's important. And then there's a question on here that I can't actually read one of the words about future awards for international grad students. So whoever's question of that is, please come up and find me afterwards so that I can actually answer the question that you posed. Any other questions then from the audience? Okay, well, it looks like we are set up for our networking reception. All of us will be available to answer questions. Feel free to chat with any of us. Thank you very much for coming, and hopefully it was beneficial to you guys, and we look forward to seeing proposals in the near future.